Okay, so this one should be quicker, but it's another video about the 40k game. I'm just going to call it by its name. It's Shadow in the Warp. That's the name of the campaign, so that's what it's going to be. So one of the things I've been looking through the hack of 5e, the system we're going to use for it. There's some interesting things. I've talked about them a little bit before, but something I'm noticing, there's a lot of stuff that just kind of uses 5e mechanics without too much thought. Maybe not without too much thought, maybe it's just like, okay, this is good enough. Prime example is the jump pack. In the world of 40k, a jump pack is like, a jetpack for, like an upgraded jetpack for a space marine that syncs in with their power suit and all that stuff, and I've been reading up on it a little bit, and it's in the Space Marine 2 game that been greatly enjoying that. But essentially what it does, it's not like a flight pack. It's literally a jump pack. You use it for extended jumps. And from what I was reading up, like, it's good for like 12 jumps, and then you throw it out. And then you just cut it off your pack and you're done for the day. No more jumping. That's not a lot. So, that has some implications, that, like, how you would design that for something like 5e. But you can find it in the rules in the hack, and what it does is it just gives you a 60-foot fly speed. That's all it does. That is not the same thing. Also, it is way, way, way more powerful. So, I don't know. How should it work? My thought is, okay, that 12, that's a good number to just grab that number. So let's give it 12 charges. And you can, at the start of your turn, you can use a charge, no action required, to give yourself a flight speed equal to like double your walking speed, or just make it 60, whatever you want to do. Either way, it doesn't matter. You get an increased movement speed, and it's a flight speed for the rest of that turn. And say at the end of the turn, like, let's say you can hover, and let's say this movement speed expires at the start of your next turn, unless you use an additional charge to reinstate it, something like that. That way you get 12 rounds of flight, and it's really powerful flight. But it's also, let's say this is a non-attunement item, and the charges return, well, we could just say they return at a long rest, or you regain a certain amount of charges on a long rest, so it doesn't have to be like super complicated where, like, oh, you gotta find Prometheum and you gotta do this, and you're like, nah, just you get charges back. Who cares? So that's one way that could work. But there's also some items missing. Things like the minor things. And the designer of the hack can't like put everything in the game. But something like the grapnel launcher, I've been seeing a lot. It's one of the abilities for one of the classes in Space Marine 2. And all it is, it's a grappling gun that you use to shoot at people, and presumably you could drag them to you, but at least in the context of the game, you just shoot a guy with it, and then you zip to him and you kick him in the head. It's not in the hack at all. So how would we design something like that? Well, maybe it works this way. It's an item, probably just like, let's maybe call it a weapon, maybe call it gear, who knows? But let's say the way it works is it's got a certain amount of charges, just because you can't just do this for free, but it's got a certain amount of charges, and maybe these charges come back on a short rest. And what it does, you can make a ranged attack against a target, and if it succeeds, then you zip over to that target, and you can make one melee attack as part of the action. Something like that. That's it's simple enough. And then let's say you can also use it on terrain, like, you know, on a wall or ground, something like that. And then, so, you know, that's a simple version of that kind of item that you could definitely have. Let's see, what else? Then there's kind of like the way general weapons and stuff work. There's like, all the items or all the weapons have, like, you know, it's all the basic items or weapons and stuff in 5e. There's some new stuff added, like las guns, whatever, and damage types are changed around. But that's not the issue I want to get at. Or it's not really an issue, but that fell over. The main thing will be the enhanced versions of these items. You know, instead of magic, it's enhanced. And what this is, like, there's, for weapons, for melee, I'll just talk about melee weapons, because ranged weapons have their own set of them, but I'm just going to use melee as an example. For melee weapons, there's basically, you can get chain versions of certain weapons, you can get power versions of certain weapons, and you can get lightning versions of certain weapons. And then there's individual named legendary type weapons and stuff. But what that does is, chained weapons do like an extra d6 physical damage. Power weapons are like a flame tongue, you turn them on and off, and they do an extra 2d6, I think, force damage. There's also the power fist, which does thunder damage instead, but it's not meaningfully different. And then there's lightning claws, which work the same way, but they do lightning damage. And that might be meaningfully different, because lightning is like a way more resistible type of damage than something like force or thunder. So, but, you know, and they kind of scale up. Like, chain weapons are uncommon rarity. Power is, like, I think, rare at least. That kind of stuff. So, you know, but then as you get into, like, higher, quote, like, higher difficulty content and higher rarity stuff, like, you can start to mix and match these things. Like, you know, I can see a very rare version of, like, a chain sword that each of the individual teeth have a power field, because I've read about that in the lore. That's fucking nonsense. But, you know, to talk about the previous video I did where I was talking about damage types. You know, damage types matter. And, like, it depends on how you write the monsters and stuff, because this hack doesn't really have any monsters with it. So it's kind of all up in the air. But, you know, that's kind of how, like, the weapon types are laid out. And there's probably other ways you can do stuff like that. And then it's like, what do those damage types mean? Like, for, like, lightning claws, like, yeah, it does extra lightning damage, but, like, in the lore, it's kind of like the lightning superheats the claws and it, like, softens up the target as you're slicing through it. It's like, how do you translate that exactly? You kind of don't. So, you know, there's some room in the system to tinker. Like, there's a plasma version for, like, ranged weapons, but all that effectively does, I think, is like, oh, on a crit you do 2d6 acid damage. Why would I use, what the fuck? Why would I use that? It's like, if I've got nothing else, sure, but, like, there's also bolt weapons that are kind of Space Marine exclusive, because they're ranged weapons that have a high strength requirement. But, you know, we're all playing Space Marines, so that's not a factor. But, like, bolter weapons, they just do an extra d6, like, fire damage, which, you know, is an more easily resisted damage type. But they've also got this system where they can customize them on a rest. Like, you can do extra fire damage, you can cause the fire damage to spread a little more, and, like, there's a bunch of other things you can do with them, like change the damage type to, like, psychic, and then it, like, harms psychers. It does, like, damage to their points and stuff. So that's all some cool customization. But, you know, that's something to get into in the actual game. But one of the other things I did want to touch on, and this might be a longer video too, is like, you know, especially with the bolt guns like spreading damage around and coming from 40K, like how much like swarm mechanics are there going to be? Is like the majority of enemies we're going to fight, like, you know, we're going to fight 40 regular little human heretic dudes all running at us like in Darktide, or, you know, 40 Tyranid gaunts all running at us like in Space Marine 2. Like, is that what we're going to be fighting? Like, I'm cool with that. But like this, like, that's part of the monster design and like part of the like CR and encounter building system. And I don't think the hack has any guidelines for that, but that's the way I think it should be. Like, there's lots of like swarms and like lots of shit like that, because it's lots of armies, and that's like the basis of the game. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to talk about today. No like real big theses in this video, just some discussion points.